Parsha Shemini. Actually, a very interesting. I think we had it this last year the same way, a couple of years ago. It's we know that the way Kriyas HaTorah works is on Shabbos they do the whole Parsha, and Monday and Thursday they do. It's usually Shabbos afternoon, Mincha. Monday and Thursday they do the Aliyah before. Because of the way Pesach fell out, we've already been reading Shemini for a couple of weeks. So Shemini is actually, the first Aliyah has been read 8 times. It's going to be just an interesting phenomenon that shows up. But one of the central themes of Shemini are the dietary laws of kashrus, what animals we can eat, what birds we're allowed to eat. It's chapters 43 to 45 discuss all of these laws. And although many try to give different reasons as to what the logic behind the dietary laws are, but at the end of the day, it's a chok. I mean, it's not something that is considered to be an intellectual mitzvah. That's the way it is. Clearly, it's either spiritually or physically the right way for a person to live, for a Jew to live at least, as we'll see. But it's not a clear cut, that we're not eating these things because, that the rest of the world understand, they eat the cheeseburgers, It's not that, so there is a verse at the end of the Parsha, it says like this, that it says, "For I am Hashem your God, and v'yiskadashtem v'yisim kadoshim, you have to sanctify yourselves and you shall be holy. Right? For I am holy." We've talked about it before. We have to be holy because God is holy. What exactly that is? And you should not contaminate yourself through the creeping things, the things that creep on the ground. Because I am the God who took you out of Mitzrayim to be for you a God, and you should be holy because I am holy. This is the law of the animal, the bird, all living creatures that swarm in both in the water and on the ground. And I'm giving you these instructions so that you'll be able to lahavdil, to distinguish between that which is contaminated and that which is pure. Listen to the words, very important. And that you should be able to make a distinction between the chaya hanecheles, the creatures, the living creatures that are necheles. What does necheles mean? Right? That may be eaten. What should be the parallel structure in the verse? You're going to have parallel. It says, I'm giving you this so that you should know which is the chaya hanecheles, and what is the next part? Ubein chaya asher. It should be enena necheles, right? That would be the parallel. That between what is necheles, which is to be eaten, and asher enena necheles, which may not be eaten. The verse switches. There's no parallel structure. Listen to this. You have to hear the Hebrew to hear it clearly. But it switches from, we have the Balkora here. What is the pasuk? Ben achaya necheles, between the animal that can be eaten. What should be the right dikduk? Ben achaya asher lo nechelet. Is that what it says?
Yeah.
No, it's not what it says. Asher lo ta'achel is what it says. So the question is, why is the grammar changing? Why is it not parallel? Instead of saying which is the animal that is necheles, which means it can be eaten, to the chaya asher lo se'achel, asher lo ta'achel, which
That is your will.
Cannot be eaten by you. Why does it have to say it in that structure? It's not a parallel structure. You would think it should be parallel. It's not. So get an insight. I think there's a tremendous insight here, and I want to just broaden it because I think it has implication in terms of how we also give over mitzvahs to our children. There is a question that is raised by the Or Sameach, Rabbi Meir Simcha from Dvinsk. He lived a couple hundred years ago, and he asks a very, very strong question. We have Shavuos coming up in 5-6 weeks, and we're all familiar, we teach our children. There is it's brought down a medrash in the beginning of Zos HaBracha. It says that Hashem miSinai ba, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu came from Sinai, revealing himself to Bnei Yisrael. The Zarach Meseir Lamo, he first shone forth before he came to the Jews, and he revealed to them he had come from Seir, right? And Rashi brings down Ophir Mahar Paran, and he had also appeared at Har Paran. So Rashi says again, I'm not going to get into all the details of what the implications are, just some basic. Rashi brings down the medrash, famous medrash, is that before Hashem offered the Torah to the Jews at Har Sinai, he shopped it around. He took it to some of the other nations of the world to see if it is something that they might be interested in. What does it say? Zarach Shepatach lebnei Seir. Bnei Seir is Esav, right? Yikablu et Torah v'lo ratzu. Right? And then he took it to the Bnei Yishmael. They didn't want it. So the full medrash says what happened. He took it to the one group, right, Esav. And he said, here is the Torah. So they said, what's written in it? Lo tirtzach. A lot of murder. That doesn't work for us. It goes to Shmuel. What's written in it? Lo tinaf. Don't commit adultery. Doesn't really work for us. The next group, lo tignov, can't steal. Doesn't work for us. Fine. They turned it down. Then he gives it to the Jewish people. So the Or Sameach, or Meir Simcha Vince, has a very basic question. We know that there's two systems in the Torah. There's the 613 mitzvahs that we are bound by from Har Sinai, but it's not a freebie for the rest of the world. The rest of the world, starting with Adam Rishon, had their own system. What's that system? The Zion Mitzvah B'nai Noach. There are 7 Noachide laws. They don't have a choice. Under the Jewish control, please God, it will be soon, if a non-Jew violates one of the 7 Noachide laws, it's a capital offense. He's executed. They don't have a choice, right? So how could it be that they are turning down the Torah and the mitzvahs that they're using as an excuse to turn down the Torah? Don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't steal. These are all mitzvahs that they are bound by the Noachide laws. So that should not be the basis. You tell me I don't want to keep shatnez, or I don't want to keep kosher. That I understand. Why take on more than I have to do anyway? But the ones that they're turning down, according to the Medrash, are the ones which fundamentally they're required to keep anyway. So how could that be the basis for them not wanting to accept the Torah? And I heard from my own Rosh Hashiva, the question is really even much stronger. Why is the question even much stronger? Because if you think about it, let's just take murder for an example. What are the chances of a Jew being executed for murder? Right? It's almost impossible. Right? In order for a Jew to be executed under Torah law, there had to be 2 witnesses that witnessed what happened. They have to have warned him that it says in the Torah, if you do this, this, and this, And he has to say, Af al pikein, even so, I understand, and I do it anyway. What are the chances? Right? Adultery. What are the chances that something like that's going to end up happening and he's going to be executed? Under Noahide laws, you can execute with circumstantial evidence. So if anything, if they are bothered by that it's hard for them to keep murder, it's hard for them to keep adultery, they should embrace accepting the Torah. Because under the Torah laws, for them to be punished for what they're doing is a much more limited application of punishment than under the current system that they have. So saying, I don't want the Torah because of these particular laws makes no sense. It would have been easier them to keep it under Torah law than it is to keep it under Noahide laws. It's the same question, but it just strengthens it much more. Why is that the basis of them not accepting the Torah? If anything, they should embrace it if that's what their issue is. Right? So, let's address these two questions first. The first one is, at the end of the parsha, we have the laws of kashrus. It says that God has given us these laws so that we know which animals, hanecheles, the ones that we can eat, and the parallel structure should have been, and those that are einena necheles, cannot be eaten, or should not be eaten. And instead of writing asher einena necheles, it writes lo se'achel. Second question is just understanding that basic medrash that God offered the Torah, that the non-Jews, the nations of the world, turned it down on mitzvahs they were anyway required to keep. And if anything, it's much more stricter the way they have to keep it than the way it would have been under Torah law. There is a Rambam in what's known as the Shmona Prakim. The Shmona Prakim is the Rambam's commentary on Pirkei Avot. Right, it's 8 chapters. In the 6th chapter, he brings down a fascinating discussion. He says that there is a debate between the philosophers and the scholars. What is a higher observance of a mitzvah? Is it a higher observance of mitzvah to say, I wish I could do this, but God says I'm not allowed? Or it's disgusting. How can anybody want to do this? A cheeseburger. It looks like a wonderful cheeseburger, but you know what? I'm salivating, but God doesn't let me have it. Or, how could anybody want to eat such a thing? Right? What's a higher level of observance of the mitzvahs? This is the Rambam asks in the 900 years ago in the Shmona Prakim. And he brings down, it's a debate between the philosophers and the scholars. And Kedarka Bakodesh, the Rambam, says they're both wrong. He says it really depends. Because there's 2 categories of mitzvahs. He categorizes. He says there's mitzvahs that are called sichli. Right? The mitzvahs that are called sichli means that they're intellectually, any society, if it wants to call itself a society, would put those mitzvahs in place, even if there was no requirement from the Torah. He says, and then there's mitzvahs that he says are not intellectual by nature. They're mitzvahs that had we not had a Torah, there would have been no reason for us to come up with that type of a prohibition. And he lists. So he says murder, theft, adultery. He says these are all things, every society that calls itself a society, right, there's social humanism. There's a morality that's built in for the functioning of a society. You have to have it. He says those are called sichli. Then you have, he says, kashrus, shatnez, Shabbos, paraduma. These are all things. Who would have come up with this idea had it not been a Torah telling you that that's what you have to do? Right? So he says, depending on the type of mitzvah it is, will determine how we need to address our observance of this mitzvah. And that'll determine the higher level to observe it. So he says like this. if it is a mitzvah that's not sichli, it's not intellectual, right? He says there's nothing wrong with a person saying you know what? I would wear shatnez. I would eat not kosher. Except the thing is that God said, you're not allowed. So he says, but a nefesh, he calls it a nefesh apogemes. He says it's a defective soul for a person to say, I really would like to have a relationship with my neighbor's wife, but God says I'm not allowed. Or I really want to steal my neighbor's car, God says I'm not allowed. He says that's a defective soul. He's there, what the person, the avodas Hashem has to be, is that we refine ourselves, that it's not just that we don't steal, but what's the mitzvah?
Not to think about it.
You should not want to steal. He says that's the way you have to fulfill the mitzvah at the highest level. So if it's a mitzvah sichli, then if it's a lack in your, he says it's a begam in your neshama that you are predisposed to wanting to do it. In your mind you want to do it, but you're just holding yourself back from doing it. He's there, the refinement of the person has to come by not wanting to go ahead and do it. And therefore he says, that they're both right and wrong. Depending on the type of mitzvah it is, that will determine whether or not, what's the higher level of trying to observe that mitzvah. It's very interesting. We have, there was a famous interview by Jimmy Carter many, many years ago, where in the interview, it was on 60 Minutes, he says that he commits adultery in his mind every day.
Lust in my heart.
In his heart, in his mind. The Zayin Mitzvahs Bnei Noach, the 7 Noachide laws, are in place because they keep a functional society. If you don't have the 7 Noachide laws, there's no courts, it's anarchy. Society will be destroyed. Meaning the mission of the 7 Noachide laws, the system, it's not just that there's 613 mitzvos are just more of the mitzvos. You've got 7 or you can have 613. The whole system is a different system. The system of the 7 is only for society to be functional. It's not about development and growth. Which means that under the Noachide laws, don't steal or don't commit adultery, you have fulfilled that mitzvah if what? If you don't steal and you don't commit adultery. But it does not constrain or restrain or require that what? That the person in his mind or in his heart should be preoccupied with thinking about stealing, or because that's not the purpose of the Noachide laws. The purpose of Noachide laws is to make sure that you don't go and take something away from someone else, and he doesn't take it away from you, and that there is some semblance of normal. There is a structure, a system that's a just system in place. But it has nothing to do with the development of the soul of the person and creating growth and refinement. It has nothing to do with that. So we understand why, just to answer up the Or Sameach's question, there's a huge reason why they did not want to keep those mitzvahs under Torah law. Right? They know they're not allowed to steal. They know they're not allowed to commit adultery. But I don't want to give up the fact that at least let me think about it. I want to be able to fantasize about doing these things. It makes me feel good. You're going to not give me a system that I'm not allowed to even do that? That's a much more difficult system. I can't keep that. So his question again, what was his question? His question was, they're required under Noachide laws to keep them anyway. No, they're not required under Noachide laws to keep them the same way as we're required under the 613 laws. And therefore that becomes something that they don't want to do. Because it puts restraints and constraints upon them in terms of what the requirement is that they're not able to handle. Comes out the following, and we'll just take the next step. We'll go talk about it in terms of our kids. It comes out the following, that according to the Rambam, what is the appropriate way to deal with a cheeseburger? Right? Ich or I could see getting into a 5-pound Maine lobster. I could hear it, or just Hashem says I can't. Comes out that the right way to deal with it is that looks good, but Hashem said we have to keep kosher. That's the right way in terms of kashrus, because kashrus is not a mitzvah sichli. So we have here a balance, and I think it's in terms of our own kids. We have a balance. There's a balance of things that we have to develop ourselves and refine ourselves into becoming better people through those type of mitzvahs. And there's also those mitzvahs that we recognize, I don't need to understand it. That's the rule. That's where the red line is. I told you so. Can't do it. I think that is, in terms of our own raising of children, you have that balance too. God is giving us, this is the template, this is the blueprint for personal growth. There are going to be certain things that we have to work on ourselves. We need to understand them, because we have to understand that it's not just enough. Don't do this, don't do that. But we have to transform ourselves into becoming higher level human beings through that. Right? Who's a higher level person? A person who wants to steal and doesn't? Or the person who stealing has become so abhorrent it wouldn't even enter his mind? What's a better human being? Right? It's unfortunate though, because we don't role model that. It used to be, I heard Marishiva give the example, it used to be, I don't know, that's not a non-issue. But when phone calls were expensive, especially a long distance one, so your kid arrives safely in Israel, right? So you tell him, when you call, I don't want to pay and spend money for the call. So tell the operator, that Higati is calling, right? I've arrived is calling. No, thank you, I don't accept it, right? It's the, right? Or the kid on the line, say you're 5, don't say you're 6. It's like the role modeling is, it's not a big deal. It's not really stealing. It's not, But that's not role modeling what we're supposed to be role modeling in terms of, I always say over the Rabbi Fran's story. It's a great story. How the Rabbi comes to him, the first grade Rabbi, and says to the father, he says, I don't understand, what's going on every day. We have pens and pencils missing in the classroom. And I go to your kid's backpack at the end of the day, and there's a whole bunch of pens and pencils that are in the backpack. So the father says, I don't understand. I don't know why he would want to do that. I bring home from work so many pens and pencils. Why does he need to take pens and pencils? So the growth through the concept of refining ourselves, that it's not enough just not to do it, but not to want to do it, right? That's a very, very important. That makes our children to elevated human beings. And really what the crux, what it comes down to, think about it for a moment. Right? If I am not stealing from you, right, which is most of society, the way it is, it's because the repercussion of what happens if I get caught, or the system does not allow it. But I really want to steal from you. Right? That means at some level, I feel I have a right to take what is yours. As opposed to, if I understand in essence that I'm not allowed to steal, right? That means that I really respect what it is that you have. And I don't want to take away from what you have. It's a whole different system, and that system can only be created through the Torah. Even if you tell us public schools, your kids will come out not stealing, that they will. But they will come out not with the refinement and the growth of understanding that mitzvah. If it's not done through the Torah understanding, that's not just don't do the act, but you have to become a person that the act is abhorrent, and I would never even consider doing it. There's famous stories of famous rabbis. They ate something not kosher and they fainted. How many of us are going to be doing something? It becomes so abhorrent in terms of certain things, even though kashas wouldn't fit what we're saying. But the act of doing something, okay, it was a mistake. I turned the light on. Okay. How many would faint? If it becomes so refined and so sensitized to it. But then on the other hand, there are also those red lines. You don't need an explanation. Sharpness? Well, if you understand it, I don't know. You got to keep sharpness. You got to keep it because God said you got to keep it. And in our homes, this is the way we do it. You don't need the explanation for everything. That's the red line. So there's a balance. There's a balance of those things that there is explanation necessary because the explanation allows for the growth. But there are also the red lines where whether you understand or you don't understand it, that's the way it needs to be done. That's the system that God has put in place. So let's go back to the question we started with. We answered up the Or Sameos question. We answered up the using the Rambam with Shmona Prakim. Listen to the wording. Chaya necheles. It means that which can be eaten. But if you also hear it well, necheles means it's edible. If you write einena necheles, the implication is not only that you can't eat it, but it's einena necheles means it's not edible. That's not the message the Torah wants to give you when it comes to laws of kashrus. It's not that it's abhorrent to you, it's not an edible thing. It's not inedible. Asher lo te'achel, it cannot be eaten by you. There's nothing wrong with it inherently. It's fine. It's not inedible. What is it? You are not allowed to eat it. But there's nothing wrong with it in and of itself. That is the message of the kashrus. It is not something that it is. It's interesting how things have morphed. Pig, chazer. It's like we have this. We cringe, whatever it is, but that's not the right message. Right message is just God does not allow us to eat it. That's it. We don't have to come up with reasons. God is not allowed to eat us. Our mitzvahs will come up why it's important for us to act that way, but that's not one of them. And that's the message at the end of the parsha, necheles and not einena necheles. Einena necheles imply that it's inedible. It's not inedible. It's edible. God doesn't want you to eat it. That's the reason. I think that's also that balance within terms of our children. But the message here, which is really such an important message, is that those mitzvahs sichli, those mitzvahs, most of them are the bein adam lechavero, that infect other people. The message shouldn't be as don't do it because you're not going to get caught, or in the higher level social humanists. Well, if you're going to do it to them, then they're going to do it to you. That's not the reason not to do it. You're not doing it because you don't want them doing it to you. You're not doing it because the act itself should be reviled and abhorred. How could you even think of wanting to do something like that? It's a high level, but that's something that we need to attain. And again, as I said, as parents, mostly it'll be through role modeling. Mostly be through role modeling. If our parents are listening, our kids are listening to us thinking about how we can avoid paying our taxes or avoid paying, Rabbi Shifman tells a story. He tells that he was involved in tuition assistance when it first when they were giving the original community. He says there was this family that they showed him that they really need a serious financial break, and he gave him a nice break, and he would do the Purim shuttle for the PTA. Did it? He would go around Erev Purim giving out the gifts, and the address that was put down for this family was like in the business downtown section. There was no such address, couldn't find it. So he did some phone calls, called families, and finally he finds, somewhere in some ritzy area in town, comes this beautiful house. That's where they actually live. And he goes and he knocks on the door, and the little kid from the school comes to the door and says, "Who is it?" He says, "It's Rabbi Stepan. Please tell your parents I'm here." So he hears the kid call through the door. He says, "Abba, they found us." Right. It's like, what's the message we're giving our kids? What's the message we're giving our kids? That's, I think just the takeaway is, the way we have to give over mitzvos, and depending on the type of mitzvah is, they should be transformative. It's not just, and I guess this is really the key. It's not behavior modification. You can get a monkey to do things. Midos, we believe midos, which is character, that person. Midos is not about knowing the right thing to say or do at any given time. You have the most cultured societies in the world, which are the most corrupt. Teaching midos doesn't mean, okay, you automatically, the person walks in, stands. That's like a monkey could do that. Midos is that you sensitize the person to react in a certain way based on the sensitivities that he's feeling. It's character development. It's not behavior modification. And that character development comes through the right approach to the mitzvos. That's how you develop that character. By understanding you can't want to steal, you can't want to commit adultery. That's where you define, that's where the midos develop from that sensitivity. As opposed to what most people consider midos is, look how nice they're eating with a knife and fork. That's not midos, that's behavior modification. That's not midos. We have what to work on.